A billionaire marries the nanny for convenience, but his heart had other plans. She entered his life as just another employee, but a single tearful glance and a gesture of tenderness were enough to shake the man who thought himself unbreakable. He sought control, distance, silence, but she arrived with a soft voice, steady hands, and slowly, without asking for anything, she began to occupy everything. And when his heart finally yielded, it was already too late. She wasn't just the nanny. She was the one woman he couldn't afford to lose. Pardon the interruption to your story, but if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. Bless this channel by helping us grow, and may God multiply it back to you twofold. Thank you, and enjoy the video. The majestic estate of Ethan Hayes stood imposingly in the hills of Beverly Hills, the most exclusive neighborhood in Los Angeles. 3 months had passed since the fatal accident that took his wife, Marianne, and the home that once resonated with laughter was now submerged in a sepulchral silence. Ethan, 38, the owner of the most influential tech empire in Silicon Valley, had become a shadow of his former self. His chiseled face, once kind and charismatic, now reflected only contained pain and a chilling coldness. The permanent dark circles under his amber eyes revealed entire nights spent without sleep. In that immense house of marble and infinite gardens, his son Leo, barely 4 years old, wandered like a little ghost. The boy, with the same expressive eyes as his mother, had almost completely stopped speaking after the accident. He limited himself to nodding or shaking his head, clutching an old stuffed rabbit that Marianne had given him. "Mr. Hayes, the documents you requested are on your desk," announced Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 20 years. "Would you like me to prepare something for you to eat? You've barely touched a thing all day." "I'm not hungry," he replied curtly, without looking up from his laptop. "Where is Leo?" "With the new nanny, sir, Miss Garcia." Ethan looked up with suspicion. 4 nannies had already come and gone in the last 3 months. None managed to connect with Leo, and he trusted no one to care for his only son. Camila Garcia had arrived at the Hayes estate just 2 weeks ago. Originally from a small town in New Mexico, at 26 years old and with a warm smile that contrasted with the coldness of the mansion, Camilla had been recommended by a prestigious childcare agency. Her resume showed a degree in early childhood education and experience with children dealing with trauma. That afternoon, while Ethan was reviewing multi-million-dollar contracts, he heard something that hadn't sounded in the house for months: Leo's laughter. Intrigued, he rose from his desk and followed the sound to the back garden. Under the shade of a sprawling ancient oak tree, Camilla was sitting on the grass with Leo. Her long black hair was tied in a simple braid, and her simple floral dress made her seem out of place in that mansion of opulence. And then, the brave coyote spirit climbed all the way to the top of the highest mesa and... Camilla moved her hands theatrically as she narrated her story. "And what did he find at the top?" Leo asked, his voice timid but full of curiosity. Ethan froze. His son was speaking, forming complete sentences. "He found a magic piece of turquoise that showed him how brave he was, even if he didn't believe it himself," Camilla replied, gently stroking the boy's hair. "Just like you, Leo. You're very brave, even when you don't know it." The boy smiled and snuggled against her as Camilla hummed a soft song, running her fingers through the little boy's hair, tracing soothing patterns on his scalp in a way that conveyed so much affection. Ethan watched the scene with a storm of conflicting emotions. On one hand, the overwhelming gratitude of seeing his son finally react after so long. On the other, a sharp pang of jealousy and rejection at the intimacy this stranger had achieved with Leo in such a short time. Over the following weeks, Camilla slowly transformed the atmosphere of the house. The spaces Leo occupied began to fill with colorful drawings. The boy started to talk more, to ask questions, even to laugh occasionally. Ethan watched her from a distance. He noticed how she improvised stories inspired by Southwestern folktales, how she prepared warm milk with cinnamon when Leo couldn't sleep, how she lulled him with Spanish lullabies she had learned from her grandmother. One afternoon, while working in his study, Ethan heard Leo running down the hall. "Mommy, look what I drew for you!" Ethan's world came to a halt. The pen he was signing with dropped from his hand, and he moved like a storm towards Leo's room. There he found Camilla sitting on the floor, holding a colorful drawing, her expression a mixture of astonishment and concern. "Leo, I didn't," she tried to explain. "Out!" Ethan's voice boomed through the room. "I need to speak with Miss Garcia alone." The boy, terrified by the tone he hadn't heard from his father in months, ran out of the room. When they were alone, the silence became dense, almost palpable. "Mr. Hayes, I swear to you I have never asked him to call me that." Camilla spoke first, her voice firm but respectful. "I understand my place here perfectly." "Your place?" Ethan's voice was low, controlled, but loaded with fury. "Your place is not to replace my son's mother. Marianne was irreplaceable." "I'm not trying to replace anyone," she replied, holding his gaze without being intimidated. "I'm only trying to help a child who is suffering and needs to feel loved and safe." "I don't need your pedagogical theories, Miss Garcia." He spat the words. "Leo has a father who barely looks him in the eye." The words escaped Camilla's lips before she could stop them. Ethan's face transformed, first in surprise at her audacity, then into a barely contained rage. "You're fired!" "Pack your things. You have 1 hour to get out of my house." Camilla nodded slowly. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she remained dignified. "As you wish. I only ask that you think about Leo, not yourself." Meanwhile, crouched behind the partially open door in the hallway, Leo heard everything, his cheeks soaked with silent tears. He hugged his stuffed rabbit tightly, the only witness to the exact moment his world, which had just begun to heal, fell apart once more. The boy ran to his secret hiding place, a small nook under the grand staircase. There, between choked sobs, he made a promise to his rabbit. He wouldn't let Camilla leave. He wouldn't lose another mum. In his study, Ethan stared out the window, his reflection a blur on the glass. For a fleeting instant, he thought he saw the disappointment in Marianne's eyes, watching him from somewhere far away. A chill ran down his spine as the sun began to set behind the Santa Monica Mountains, plunging the mansion once again into the darkness that had become so familiar to him. 3 days had passed since Camilla left the Hayes estate, 3 days of a silence even more profound than before. Leo had refused to eat, retreating into a mutism that not even Mrs. Gable's pleas could break. Ethan was trying to focus on a video call with investors when Mr. Davies, his lawyer, rushed into his study. "Pardon the interruption, Mr. Hayes, but this can't wait." The man, in an impeccable suit and with a grave expression, held an envelope with an official seal. After abruptly ending the call, Ethan took the envelope. What he read in those documents made his blood run cold. Marianne's parents, Robert and Dolores Sinclair, had initiated legal proceedings to obtain custody of Leo. "What the hell is this?" Ethan's voice trembled with rage. "How dare they try to take my son from me?" "They're alleging emotional neglect," Davies explained cautiously. "They claim the boy has been emotionally abandoned since Marianne's death. Apparently, they've been receiving information from someone inside the house." Ethan immediately thought of Camilla, but Davies shook his head. "According to my sources, it was the nanny before Miss Garcia who contacted them, concerned about the boy's condition." The lawyer spread more documents across the desk. "The worst part is this preliminary report from the social worker assigned to the case. It doesn't look good, Mr. Hayes." The report described Leo as a child profoundly affected by the absence of stable female figures in his life, and mentioned the father's emotional inaccessibility as an aggravating factor. "Judge Albright has scheduled a visit from the social worker for next week," Davies continued. "We must be prepared to demonstrate that Leo has a stable home." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He roamed the mansion like a phantom, stopping in front of his son's room. Pushing the door open slightly, he found Leo asleep, clutching a piece of clothing he didn't immediately recognize. As he moved closer, his heart lurched. It was a colorful, embroidered scarf that belonged to Camilla. The little boy was hugging it as if it were his most precious treasure. The next morning, without a word to anyone, Ethan drove his Audi to the modest neighborhood of Echo Park. Across the street from a middle-class apartment building, he waited a full hour before he saw Camilla emerge, dressed simply in jeans and a white blouse. "Miss Garcia," he called out, getting out of the car. Camilla stopped, surprised. The resolve in her eyes showed she was still hurt. "I need to speak with you urgently," he continued. "Please." That please sounded foreign coming from Ethan Hayes, a man accustomed to giving orders, not begging. In a nearby coffee shop, with the aroma of artisanal coffee wafting between them, Ethan explained the situation without preamble. "If the Sinclairs get custody, they'll take Leo to Boston. They never forgave me for Marianne moving to Los Angeles for me." Camilla listened in silence, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug for warmth. "And what do you want from me?" she finally asked. "You made it clear you don't want me near your son." Ethan took a deep breath, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a rare gesture of nervousness. I need you to come back, not just as a nanny. He paused. I need you to be my wife. The mug Camilla was holding nearly fell to the floor. Are you joking? Her eyes widened in disbelief. It's a marriage of convenience, he clarified quickly. The judge is looking for family stability, a maternal figure. If we appear as a united family, the chances of them taking Leo from me decrease drastically. You're asking me to lie? To pretend to be your wife? Indignation rose in her voice. After how you treated me, I'll offer you a generous contract. You'll be able to save enough to open the school you've always wanted. Camilla shot up from her seat, tears of anger shining in her eyes. Do you think everything can be solved with money? I'm not an employee you can buy, Mr. Hayes. And Leo's feelings are not a business transaction. She stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving Ethan alone with the bitter realization that he had made another grave mistake. Never in his corporate life had he felt such desperation in the face of failure. That night, Camilla couldn't sleep. The image of Leo, his little face lighting up when she entered the room, haunted her. What was the little boy feeling now? Would he think that she had abandoned him too, just like everyone else? Her phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable. Camilla, dear, forgive me for bothering you so late. The older woman's voice was filled with worry. Leo hasn't eaten all day. He only asks for you and he sleeps hugging that scarf you left behind. Camilla's heart constricted. And Mr. Hayes? She asked. He's a wreck, though he'd never show it. I've never seen him like this, not even when Mrs. Marianne passed. At least then he stayed strong for the boy. Now it seems like he's lost all hope. The next morning, Camilla was at the door of the Hayes estate. She hadn't slept, but her decision was made. When Ethan opened the door, his expression of shock was indescribable. I accept your proposal, she said without preamble, but I have my conditions. Ethan, still in disbelief, gestured for her to come inside. I am doing this solely for Leo, Camilla clarified as they entered the study. Not for you or your money. I understand. We will not share a bedroom, she continued, and I want it to be clear that this is temporary, only until the legal situation is resolved. Of course, he agreed. And one last thing. Camilla's eyes locked with his. If I am going to be Ethan Hayes' wife, even a pretend one, you will treat me with respect. I will not be your employee or a decorative object. For the first time since he'd met her, Ethan truly looked at her. He saw not just the sweet nanny who had won over his son, but a woman with a dignity and strength he had failed to appreciate before. You have my word, he replied with sincerity. At that moment, a small sound made them turn towards the door. Leo stood there, his stuffed rabbit in one hand and Camilla's scarf in the other. His eyes darted between them, filled with confusion. Is Camilla going to live with us again? He asked in a small voice. Before Ethan could answer, Camilla knelt in front of the boy. Yes, sweet boy, I'm back and I'm not leaving. Leo ran to her, hugging her with such force that he nearly knocked her over. Over the little boy's head, Camilla and Ethan's gazes met. Something indefinable passed between them, a silent agreement, a promise, perhaps the beginning of a truce. What neither of them could imagine was how that decision, born of necessity and desperation, would change their lives forever. The Los Angeles County Courthouse had never seen a wedding so devoid of joy. At 10 in the morning on a random Tuesday, Camilla Garcia and Ethan Hayes signed the documents that legally made them husband and wife, under the curious gaze of a judge who had witnessed thousands of unions but few as cold as this one. Camilla wore a simple, bone-colored pantsuit, without embellishments or a veil. Her only accessory was a small silver hummingbird brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. Ethan, in an impeccable grey suit, maintained a serious countenance, as if he were closing another business deal. The only witnesses were Mr. Davies, the lawyer, Mrs. Gable, and Leo, who watched everything with inquisitive eyes, dressed in a little navy blue suit that made him look like a miniature adult. You may kiss the bride, the judge announced after the signatures. An awkward silence followed his words. Finally, Ethan leaned in and placed a quick, dry kiss on Camilla's cheek. She remained rigid, a practiced smile on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. The papers are in order, Mr. Davies murmured, handing a folder to Ethan. The social worker will receive notification of the marriage tomorrow. It should make a favorable impression. As they were leaving the building, Camilla felt a tug on her suit jacket. It was Leo, holding out a small yellow flower he had plucked from a planter in the hallway. For you, Mommy, he said with innocence. Camilla knelt to hug him. fighting back tears. The word mommy sounded different now. It was no longer a forbidden word, but part of the charade they had built. Ethan observed the scene with an unreadable expression before glancing at his Rolex. "We have to go. I have a video conference in an hour." The ride back to the mansion was silent. Ethan drove with intense focus, occasionally answering messages at red lights. Camilla sat in the back with Leo, who, exhausted by the morning's excitement, was starting to nod off. "Are you sleepy, little one?" Camilla whispered, gently settling the boy's head onto her lap. Leo nodded, taking Camilla's hand and pressing it against his cheek, as if he feared she might vanish while he slept. She began to hum a soft lullaby, stroking his hair with a tenderness that seemed as natural as breathing. From the driver's seat, Ethan watched the scene in the rearview mirror. Something about Camilla's innate gentleness with his son caused a knot to form in his throat. He was fleetingly reminded of Marianne singing to Leo when he was a baby, the same devotion in her touch. The memory, instead of bringing its usual sharp, stabbing pain, was followed by a strange sense of peace. For a brief, charged moment, their gazes met in the mirror. Camilla didn't look away, holding his stare with a mixture of defiance and dignity that Ethan found deeply disconcerting. Upon arriving at the mansion, a nervous Mrs. Gable greeted them at the door. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes." It was the first time the housekeeper had addressed her that way, the name sounding foreign and heavy in the marble foyer. "I've prepared the master suite for you both as you instructed." Camilla and Ethan exchanged a tense glance. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Camilla responded with practiced ease. "But for now, I'll continue to use my previous room. I need some time to get my things organized." The older woman looked confused, her eyes darting between them, but she didn't dare to question the arrangement. "As you wish, ma'am." When they were alone in the vast entrance hall, Ethan stepped closer to Camilla. "Why did you do that?" he asked in a low voice, careful that Leo, who was now engrossed with a new toy car on the floor, wouldn't overhear. "We are supposed to look like a real married couple, and we will when it's necessary," she replied firmly, her voice not wavering. "But I will not be sharing your bedroom, Mr. Hayes. That was not part of our agreement." The persistent formality with which Camilla continued to address him as Mr. Hayes, despite now legally being his wife, was beginning to irritate Ethan more than he cared to admit. The social worker could show up at any moment unannounced, he insisted, the logic of his argument feeling unassailable. "Then I will leave some of my things in your room," Camilla offered as a compromise, a practical solution to a problem he saw only as an obstacle. "A few books, a robe in the closet, but I will not sleep there." For an instant, it looked as if Ethan would argue further, but he ultimately gave a stiff nod. "Fine, have it your way. I'll be in my study for the rest of the day." The following days were a strange, meticulous exercise in forced coexistence. Camilla slipped into her new role with a quiet determination, subtly reorganizing the household's rhythm. Breakfast, which Ethan had always taken alone in his study while scanning market reports, was now served in the formal dining room for all three of them. Dinners, though often quiet, became a family affair, with Leo serving as the fragile bridge between two adults who barely spoke of anything beyond the boy's needs. During these meals, Ethan found himself watching her. He observed the way Camilla cut Leo's food into small, manageable pieces, the gentleness with which she wiped a smudge of sauce from his cheek, the genuine interest in her voice when she asked about his drawings or the games he played. They were small, seemingly insignificant gestures, yet they filled the cavernous void Marianne had left with a quiet warmth he hadn't realized was missing. One evening, as Camilla was tucking Leo into bed, the boy asked the question they had both been dreading. "Are you my real mom now?" Camilla felt her heart constrict. She searched for the right words, acutely aware that Ethan was standing just out of sight in the hallway, listening to every syllable. "Your mommy will always be your mommy, sweet boy. She's watching over you from the stars," she said, her hand stroking his cheek. "I'm just here to love you and take care of you here on Earth." "And do you and Daddy love each other like my friend's parents?" The silence grew heavy, charged with unspoken truths. Camilla could feel Ethan's presence, as if he was standing right beside her. "Your dad and I, we care about each other in a very special way," she finally answered, her voice a soft reassurance. "But the most important thing is that we both love you more than anything in the world." The answer seemed to satisfy Leo, who soon drifted off to sleep. As she stepped out of the room, Camilla came face to face with Ethan. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something she hadn't seen before. "Thank you," he said simply. It was the first time he had thanked her for anything with genuine sincerity. Later that night, Camilla stood before the mirror in her own room. "Camilla Hayes," she murmured, testing the weight of the name on her tongue. The sound provoked a confusing mix of discomfort and an indefinable flutter of emotion she refused to analyze. In his study, Ethan reviewed the custody case documents. The first hearing was in 2 weeks. On his desk, a framed photo from his wedding to Marianne stood in cruel contrast to the cold, sterile ceremony from that morning. "Forgive me," he whispered to the smiling image. "You know I'm doing this for Leo." But as he closed his eyes, it wasn't Marianne's face that materialized in his mind. It was the defiant gaze of Camilla in the rearview mirror, her hand holding his son's as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment, he had to admit, maybe it was. A week had passed since the wedding. The Hayes estate, which for so long had operated with the precision of a well-oiled corporation, was beginning to experience subtle but profound shifts. Ethan noticed it first in the mornings. He no longer woke to the quiet sound of Mrs. Gable leaving his coffee beside his computer. Now it was the aroma of freshly made pancakes and berries that filled the air, and Camilla's clear voice calling Leo for breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," Camilla greeted him that morning as she poured fresh orange juice. "Breakfast is ready." Ethan surveyed the scene. It was no longer the solitary tray he was accustomed to, but a table set for 3, complete with colorful napkins and a small vase of bright bougainvillea freshly cut from the garden. "I always have breakfast in my study," he commented dryly, a statement of fact and an implicit order. "And Leo always had breakfast alone with Mrs. Gable," Camilla responded, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Things change, Mr. Hayes. We're a family now, at least on the surface." The word family resonated uncomfortably in Ethan's chest. However, when Leo appeared, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and broke into a wide grin upon seeing them both at the table, something in Ethan's rigid posture softened. "Daddy, Camilla made pancakes," the boy exclaimed, scrambling onto his chair. Ethan couldn't remember the last time his son had called him Daddy with such unadulterated joy. The changes continued. The rigid schedule that had governed the house became more flexible. Camilla established a mandatory playtime after school, before Leo started his homework, insisting that the boy needed balance. "I don't agree with this new schedule," Ethan protested one afternoon, watching as Camilla helped Leo with a large floor puzzle. "Discipline is important. So is joy," she countered without looking up, fitting a piece into place. "A child needs structure, yes, but he also needs to know it's okay to laugh." "And now you're suggesting I'm the one who doesn't let him laugh?" Ethan's tone hardened. Camilla finally lifted her gaze, her dark eyes meeting his with a mix of compassion and challenge that he found infuriatingly effective. "When was the last time you played with him, Mr. Hayes? When was the last time you truly heard him laugh?" The question hung in the air between them, a silent, irrefutable accusation. Ethan retreated to his study without a word, but her question echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. On Friday of that week, Ethan had his driver deliver a large box from a high-end boutique on Rodeo Drive. "For Mrs. Hayes," the driver announced, handing the package to Camilla. "Mr. Hayes requests that you wear it tonight. They have an important dinner with business partners." Inside the box, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was an emerald green designer gown with an elegant neckline and a price tag that amounted to 3 months of her former salary as a nanny. At 7 o'clock sharp, Ethan waited in the foyer, impeccable in his Italian designer suit. When he heard footsteps on the grand staircase, he looked up, expecting to see Camilla in the dress he had chosen. Instead, she was descending in a simple navy blue dress that was clearly not new, but which hugged her figure with a natural grace. Her only adornments were the same silver hummingbird brooch she had worn on their wedding day and a pair of small silver earrings. "Where is the dress I sent?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with controlled annoyance. "It was beautiful," Camilla acknowledged. "But I am not a doll for you to dress up, Mr. Hayes. This dress is mine. I bought it with my own money, and I feel comfortable in it." He was about to protest when Leo ran into the foyer. "You look like a princess, Camilla," the boy exclaimed, hugging her legs. Ethan was left speechless. Under the warm light of the chandelier, Camilla did look beautiful, not with the manufactured beauty the expensive gown was designed to create, but with a simple elegance that radiated from her natural dignity. For the first time, he noticed the sheen of her black hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders and how her dark eyes sparkled with resolve. During the dinner at one of Beverly Hills' most exclusive restaurants, Camilla handled herself with a poise that astonished Ethan. She conversed intelligently about contemporary art with a partner's wife and showed genuine curiosity during discussions about emerging technologies. No one would have ever guessed that until recently she had simply been Leo's nanny. The real test came the following Saturday. Without any warning, Trevor Shaw, an old college friend and now a minority partner in Ethan's firm, showed up at the mansion. Trevor was known for his arrogance and for treating staff with a barely concealed disdain. "Ethan, old buddy," he boomed as he entered, completely ignoring Camilla, who was in the living room. "Hey, sweetheart, grab me a whiskey on the rocks," he said, not even looking at her, as if she were just another member of the household staff. A thick, uncomfortable silence filled the room. Ethan, seated behind his desk, looked up, his face a mask of neutrality, waiting. Camilla, who had been adjusting a vase of flowers, turned around slowly. "Excuse me, Mr. Shaw," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not the help. I'm Camilla Hayes, Ethan's wife. The bar is over there. Please help yourself." Trevor's face shifted from astonishment to indignation. He shot a look at Ethan, expecting him to correct the situation, to put this woman in her place. Ethan merely watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. "You married the maid?" Trevor let out a disbelieving laugh. "Wow, buddy. I didn't know you were that desperate." Camilla gripped the vase so tightly her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, ready to respond, but Ethan spoke first. "I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my wife, Trevor." His voice was dangerously quiet. "And if you can't, perhaps we should reschedule this meeting." The look of shock on Camilla's face was almost as profound as the one on Trevor's. "It was just a joke, man," Trevor backpedaled, suddenly uncomfortable. "Didn't know you'd gotten so sensitive." The meeting proceeded in a tense atmosphere. Trevor left early, clearly irritated. When the front door closed behind him, Camilla turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she said, the words simple but carrying immense weight. Ethan gave a slight nod, surprised at his own instinct to defend her. "He won't be invited back," he added after a moment. That night, as he reviewed contracts in his study, Ethan paused mid-signature. The memory of Camilla facing down Trevor with such unshakable dignity lingered in his mind. It wasn't the submissive reaction he might have expected from an employee elevated by convenience, nor the pretentious arrogance of someone trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers. It was the calm fortitude of a woman who, regardless of her origin or station, knew she deserved respect. When he finally went up to bed, he passed Camilla's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see her inside, reading a story to Leo, both of them giggling at something he couldn't quite hear. The sound of that shared laughter sparked a strange, unfamiliar feeling in his chest, something warm and poignant he hadn't felt in a very long time. Perhaps, he thought as he continued toward his own solitary bedroom, there was more to Camilla Garcia than he had ever been willing to see. The California winter rains had arrived, with their customary intensity. That Sunday afternoon, the sky had darkened to a deep gray, and thick droplets pounded against the panoramic windows of the Hayes estate. Camilla had transformed one of the sunniest rooms in the house into a cozy playroom for Leo. Previously, the boy's toys had been kept neatly organized on shelves in his bedroom, more like decorative objects than actual tools for fun. Now, colorful cushions were strewn across the floor, the walls were adorned with Leo's latest artistic creations, and a soft rug with a woodland animal motif dominated the center of the space. That day, Camilla was dressed in a simple outfit, gray sweatpants and a loose-fitting sweatshirt that contrasted sharply with the elegant dresses she usually wore to maintain appearances. With her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, and without a trace of makeup, she was on the floor with Leo, building a city out of colorful blocks. "Look, Camilla, this is the tallest skyscraper in the world," Leo exclaimed, crowning his creation with a final blue triangular block. "Wow, that's impressive. And what's that round building over there?" she asked, pointing to another structure. "That's where you and Daddy work," Leo answered with matter-of-fact innocence. "And right here," he added, placing 3 small figurines together, "is where we live." Camilla smiled, a mix of tenderness and melancholy. For Leo, the charade had become his reality. In his innocent world, they were a real family. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the partially open doorway. Ethan, who had decided to work from home because of the storm, had stopped in his tracks upon hearing the sound of laughter. Something about the scene held him captive, watching the effortless interaction between his son and the woman who now carried his name. Leo was laughing with complete abandon, a sound he rarely made when it was just the two of them. And Camilla, she was immersed in the game with an authenticity that was mesmerizing. She wasn't feigning interest like some of the previous nannies. She was truly present, savoring every moment with the child. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Leo flinched, and Camilla instinctively pulled him into a tight embrace, shielding him. "It's okay, sweet boy," she whispered into his hair. "It's just noise. We're safe in here." It was only then that she noticed Ethan's presence. She sat up quickly, a faint blush rising on her cheeks as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. "Mr. Hayes, we didn't hear you come in," she said, nervously smoothing down her sweatshirt. "Daddy!" Leo cried out, scrambling to his feet and running towards him. "Come play with us, we're building Los Angeles." Ethan hesitated. He couldn't remember the last time he had sat on the floor to play. Even with Marianne, he had always maintained a certain paternal distance, as if he feared that fully engaging in fatherhood would somehow diminish his authority. "I'm sure your dad has work to do," Camilla intervened, sensing his discomfort. But something in Leo's crestfallen expression struck a chord within Ethan. Without a word, he took off his suit jacket, folded it meticulously over a nearby chair, and to the astonishment of both Camilla and Leo, he sat down on the rug beside the block constructions. "All right, what do we have here?" he asked, examining the miniature city. "If this is Los Angeles, then we're missing the US Bank Tower, don't you think?" Leo's eyes lit up. He had never seen his father participate in his games like this. For the next hour, the three of them built together. Ethan, who knew iconic buildings from his business travels around the world, suggested shapes and structures, which Leo enthusiastically brought to life with his blocks. Camilla watched the interaction in amazement, noticing how the ever-present tension in Ethan's shoulders gradually began to dissipate. At one point, Leo became distracted, rearranging a line of toy cars on the other side of the room. Camilla glanced at Ethan, who was watching his son with an unconscious smile on his face. "He has your smile, you know," she commented softly. Ethan looked at her, surprised, as if he had momentarily forgotten she was there. "It's funny," he replied after a pause. "I always thought he looked just like Marianne." "He has her eyes," Camilla agreed. "Definitely. But his determination, that way he furrows his brow when he's concentrating." Camilla mimicked the expression on her own face, perfectly capturing Leo's look of intense focus. "That is all you." Ethan remained silent, processing her words. It was the first time anyone had pointed out a resemblance to his son that went beyond the physical. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass filled the space between them until Leo returned, proudly showing them his new fleet of toy cars. A few minutes later, Mrs. Gable appeared to take the boy for his afternoon snack. They were left alone, sitting on the floor amidst a landscape of colorful toys. Camilla began to gather the blocks methodically, respecting the quiet that had settled between them. "I don't know how to do it," Ethan said suddenly, his gaze fixed on a single red block he held between his fingers. "Do what?" she asked softly. "Be a father." His voice was uncharacteristically vulnerable, stripped of its usual authority. "Ever since Marianne died, I'm terrified I'm doing everything wrong, that I'm not enough for him." Camilla stopped tidying and looked at him directly. It was the first time Ethan had shared anything so deeply personal with her, a crack in the formidable armor he wore every day. "There's no perfect formula for being a parent," she responded, with a gentleness that soothed the raw edge in his voice. "And we all live with the fear of failing the people we love. You seem to know exactly what he needs in every moment," he said, a note of raw frustration surfacing. "Not always," Camilla confessed. "Sometimes I'm just improvising and hoping for the best. But I do know that Leo doesn't need perfection. He needs presence. Your presence." Ethan finally lifted his gaze, meeting Camilla's sincere eyes. There was no reproach or judgment in them, only a calm understanding that was both disarming and somehow deeply comforting. "My own father never had time for me," he said, the admission costing him a visible effort. "I always swore I would never repeat that pattern, and yet here I am." "You are here," Camilla interrupted gently but firmly. "That already makes you different. And today you played with your son as if nothing else in the world mattered. I saw the way Leo looked at you, with awe, with pure joy. Those are the moments he will remember when he's older. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, but this time the thunder that followed was a distant rumble. The storm was beginning to move on. "Thank you," Ethan murmured, and for the first time the words were completely devoid of formality or reservation. They were utterly sincere. Camilla gave a small nod, acknowledging the gravity of the moment. It wasn't just a thank you for her words, but for the safe space she had unknowingly created, a space where Ethan Hayes, the powerful tycoon who never showed weakness, could voice his deepest fears. They continued gathering the toys in a different kind of silence, one that was comfortable, closer. When they finished, Ethan stood up first, and in a gesture that would have been unthinkable just days before, he extended his hand to help Camilla up. She took it, feeling the warmth and strength of his fingers for a brief, startling instant before letting go. "I should probably go see what Leo is up to," Camilla said, moving towards the door, needing to put some space between them. "Camilla!" Ethan called out just before she left. She stopped, turning back to look at him. "You can call me Ethan," he said. "I think it's time we dropped the Mr. Hayes, don't you?" A small, genuine smile touched Camilla's lips. "Okay, Ethan." When she walked out of the room, the grey light of the rainy afternoon seemed to have acquired a different, brighter quality. Something fundamental had shifted between them, as subtle as it was significant. An invisible bridge had begun to form across the chasm that separated them. Winter had descended on Southern California with unusual force. That December night, a fierce thunderstorm lashed the hills of Beverly Hills. The palm trees bent before the fury of the wind, and rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, as if trying to break through. Camilla had lit a fire in the main living room's grand fireplace, a feature of the house that was rarely used. Leo, mesmerized by the dancing flames, had curled up beside her on the enormous sofa as they read a book of Native American legends together. The little boy was particularly captivated by the story of the Thunderbird, the great spirit who created storms with the flap of its wings. "And can it really make lightning flash from its eyes?" Leo asked, his own eyes wide with wonder. "That's what the legend says," Camilla answered, showing him the powerful illustrations. "They are magical creatures who rule the skies." In the middle of her explanation, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the entire room, followed instantly by a deafening clap of thunder that seemed to shake the mansion to its foundations. The lights flickered violently, and a few seconds later the entire house was plunged into darkness. Only the warm orange glow of the fireplace allowed them to distinguish shapes in the gloom. "Camilla!" Leo's small voice was tight with fear. "It's okay, sweet boy," she comforted him, pulling him into a secure hug. "The power just went out. It will be back on soon." The emergency generator should have kicked in automatically, but for some reason it hadn't. Camilla guessed the storm must have damaged a circuit somewhere on the property. "Where's Daddy?" Leo asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "In his study, working," Camilla replied, though she wasn't certain. Ethan had mentioned a late-night video conference with investors in Tokyo. They continued the story by the firelight, with Camilla improvising parts when the words on the page became too difficult to see. Slowly, the rhythm of Leo's breathing deepened until he finally fell asleep in her lap. Camilla gently stroked his hair, watching the shadows the fire cast on the walls. There was something hypnotic in the dancing shapes, something primitive and comforting. Without realizing it, her own eyelids began to feel heavy. She didn't know how much time had passed when she sensed a presence in the room. Peeking through her lashes, she distinguished the tall figure of Ethan approaching quietly, something held in his hands. Instinctively, she feigned sleep. Ethan approached with a thick Pendleton wool blanket, its traditional patterns rich in the firelight. With gestures that were surprisingly delicate for a man of his size and power, he carefully draped the blanket over both Camilla and Leo, making sure they were completely covered. For a long moment, he simply stood there beside the sofa, looking down at them. Camilla could feel his gaze on her even with her eyes closed. There was something intimate, almost sacred, about being watched like that, unknowingly, or at least without him knowing she was aware. Finally, Ethan turned to leave. As he did, Leo stirred slightly in his sleep. "Daddy, stay," the boy murmured, not opening his eyes. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. In the silence of the room, broken only by the crackle of the logs and the steady beat of the rain against the glass, he seemed to be engaged in an internal debate. Then, to Camilla's complete surprise, he walked back and sat down in the large leather armchair closest to the sofa. The warmth from the hearth, the soothing sound of the rain, and the quiet, reassuring presence of Ethan created an atmosphere of strange serenity. Camilla allowed herself to open her eyes just a slit, finding Ethan's gaze fixed on the fire. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words were for the blanket and for his decision to stay. Ethan turned his head, startled to find her awake. "I thought you were asleep," he responded in an equally low voice. "Almost," Camilla confessed, "but I felt the blanket. That was very kind of you." In the flickering firelight, Ethan's usually severe features seemed softer, his expression stripped of its usual defenses, leaving him looking almost vulnerable. For a moment neither spoke, letting the comfortable silence communicate for them. "I've never seen the fireplace lit before," Ethan commented finally, his voice a low rumble. "I wasn't even sure it worked." "It's beautiful," Camilla replied, her eyes on the flames. Leo was fascinated. He said it was like having a little piece of the sun inside the house. The corner of Ethan's mouth curved into a faint smile. "He has a special way of seeing the world." "All children do," Camilla nodded. "They just need someone to listen to their magic." Leo shifted in his sleep, snuggling deeper against Camilla's side. She adjusted the blanket, and a subtle fragrance wafted towards Ethan, lavender mixed with something else, something uniquely her. It was the natural scent of her hair, something he had vaguely noticed before, but never with such clarity. "Do you mind if I—" Ethan gestured towards Leo. "I can take him up to his room." Camilla shook her head gently. "It's all right. I don't want to wake him." Ethan nodded, settling back into the armchair. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to subside. The interval between the lightning and thunder grew longer. Unplanned, the three of them remained there, cocooned in the warm, quiet space, until late into the night. At some point, Camilla succumbed to a true deep sleep. Her head tilted slightly, her lips parted. Ethan remained awake, his gaze alternating between the dying embers and the two figures on the sofa. So much had changed in such a short time. The house that had once felt like a cold, cavernous mausoleum of painful memories now held pockets of warmth he had never anticipated. And this woman who had entered their lives out of sheer necessity, was effortlessly transforming everything around her. The power came back on around 4 in the morning, the sudden glare of the lamps startling Ethan. He quickly moved to turn them all off except one, not wanting to disturb Camilla and Leo. He went up to his own room but found he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Camilla asleep, his son protected in her arms, returned to him, along with that lingering scent of lavender that seemed to have imprinted itself on his memory. The next morning, Ethan came downstairs early. He found Camilla in the kitchen preparing breakfast while Leo sat at the table, coloring with a new set of crayons. "Daddy!" the boy exclaimed upon seeing him. "I drew our night by the fire. See, here are all 3 of us." Ethan took the drawing. It showed 3 smiling stick figures in front of a large orange blaze. Across the top, in a child's uneven script, were the words, "My family." Something tightened in his chest. "It's great, champ," he said, ruffling Leo's hair. As he looked up, his eyes met Camilla's. She was watching him with an unreadable expression as she poured hot chocolate into mugs. Unable to help himself, Ethan smiled. When she returned it, a slow, shy smile that lit up her entire face. Something warm and unfamiliar expanded through his chest. Camilla looked away first, a faint blush on her cheeks, but the moment was already etched between them. During breakfast, as Leo recounted a fantastic dream about flying thunderbirds, Ethan found himself studying Camilla, the way her hands cradled the warm mug, the slight tilt of her head as she listened intently to Leo, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across her forehead. When she caught him looking, he quickly averted his gaze to his coffee, pretending to be deeply interested in stirring the sugar he hadn't even added, but he could no longer deny what was beginning to happen inside him. It was a new and terrifying feeling, one that was most definitely not part of the plan. That stormy night had fundamentally changed something between them, and no matter how much he tried to ignore it, he knew there was no going back. The library in the Hayes mansion was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, rolling ladders to reach the highest volumes, and a collection that blended first editions with contemporary classics. However, until Camilla's arrival, it had been a space that was more decorative than functional. That January afternoon, Camilla had decided to organize the children's section. Leo was beginning to show a real interest in reading, and she wanted to make the age-appropriate books more accessible. "Look at this one, Leo," she said, dusting off a collection of classic American fairy tales. "It has all the stories we've talked about, but with the most beautiful pictures." The boy came closer, fascinated by the colorful drawings of characters from folklore. Among the books, Camilla found one that caught her eye, a beautifully illustrated edition of The Little Prince. As she opened it, something slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. It was a cream-colored envelope, yellowed with age. There was no address, only a single name written in elegant, familiar script. Ethan. Camilla picked it up carefully. She knew she shouldn't look, that it was private, but the envelope was unsealed. She couldn't help but see that it was a handwritten letter, and she immediately recognized the name signed at the bottom, Marianne. "What did you find, Camilla?" Leo asked, trying to peer at it. "Nothing important, sweet boy," she replied, quickly tucking the envelope away. "Why don't you go get your crayons? We could try drawing some of these characters." Once Leo had scampered off, Camilla stared at the envelope, uncertain. The right thing to do was to give it to Ethan, but she dreaded his reaction. Any mention of Marianne usually made him tense and withdrawn. She took a deep breath. She couldn't hide something like this from him. She waited until after dinner. Leo was in bed and Ethan was in his study, as he was every night. Camilla knocked softly on the heavy oak door. "Come in," his deep voice called from within. The room was dimly lit, the city lights twinkling in the massive window behind his imposing desk. "Sorry to interrupt, Ethan," Camilla began, still feeling a little hesitant with the informal address he himself had suggested. "I found something I think you should see." She pulled the envelope from her pocket and held it out to him. He glanced at it, his expression uncomprehending at first, but as he recognized the handwriting, his entire demeanor changed. A mask of cold fury slammed down. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tight as he snatched the envelope from her hand. "It was inside a copy of The Little Prince in the library," Camilla explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "It fell out when I opened it to show Leo." Ethan shot up from his chair, his eyes blazing. "Did you read it?" he demanded, stalking towards her. "No, of course not," Camilla defended herself, taking a step back. "I just saw it was from Marianne and—" "How dare you go digging through my things?" he interrupted, his voice rising dangerously. "What gives you the right to invade my privacy?" Camilla flinched, stung by the unfairness of the accusation. "I wasn't digging through anything," she replied, fighting to keep her composure. "I was organizing books for your son. If I wanted to invade your privacy, I would have read the letter, which I didn't do out of respect." "Respect?" The word was like a whip crack. "Don't you talk to me about respect when you just—" "When I just what?" Camilla challenged, her own indignation rising to meet his anger. "Returned something important I found by accident, when I tried to do the right thing." Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he fought for control. "Get out of my study," he ordered, his voice like ice. "Now!" Camilla stared at him for a long moment, the hurt plain in her eyes. Without another word, she turned and left, closing the door behind her with more force than was necessary. In her room, the tears she had held back finally fell. She wasn't crying from sadness, but from a deep, burning frustration at being so unjustly treated when her only intention had been to help. Meanwhile, Ethan stood staring at the envelope in his hands. It was the last letter Marianne had ever written him, just before the accident. He had tucked it inside that book, their favorite, planning to read it to Leo together one day. With trembling hands, he pulled out the single sheet of paper and began to read. "My dearest Ethan, by the time you read this, I'll be in Boston with my parents. Leo is asleep as I write this, looking so beautiful and so much like you. It breaks my heart to think of leaving, even for a few days. I know we've been arguing too much lately. We're both stubborn and proud, flaws I pray our son doesn't inherit, but I need you to know that never, not even in our worst moments, have I ever stopped loving you. You asked for time to think, and I respect that. I'll use these days to do some thinking of my own. I only ask one thing of you. If something were to ever happen to me, you know how paranoid I am about flying, promise me you won't lock yourself away in your grief. Leo will need you whole. He'll need you present. And one day maybe you'll let yourself love again. I miss you even before I've left. Forever yours, Marianne." The words blurred as tears he hadn't realized he was holding back streamed freely down his face. For the first time since the funeral, Ethan allowed himself to truly weep. Deep, shuddering sobs racked his body as he clutched the letter to his chest, the paper crinkling under the force of his grief. "Daddy?" Leo's small voice from the half-open doorway startled him. "Why are you crying?" Ethan froze. His first instinct was to wipe the tears, to deny, to hide, but Marianne's words echoed in his mind, a spectral command. "Leo will need you whole. He'll need you present." "I'm sad, champ," he answered, his voice raw and hoarse. "Sometimes grown-ups cry too." Leo padded into the room and, with the simple, unquestioning acceptance of a child, climbed onto his lap. "Camilla says that crying cleans your heart," the boy commented, matter-of-factly repeating something he had clearly been told, like how the rain cleans the streets. Ethan hugged his son tightly, letting the pure, uncomplicated comfort of his presence anchor him in the storm of his sorrow. From the hallway, Camilla watched the scene unfold. She had followed Leo when she found him wandering, drawn by the sounds from the study. She didn't intervene, respecting the sanctity of the moment between father and son. She retreated silently to her room, leaving them to find their way through the pain together. The next morning, the tension at the breakfast table was a palpable thing. Leo, oblivious, chattered excitedly about an upcoming school field trip. When he finished, Mrs. Gable whisked him away to get ready. "Camilla," Ethan began once they were alone. "About last night." "You don't have to," she interrupted, standing to clear the plates, her movements brisk and avoidant. "Yes, I do." Ethan stood and moved towards her, closing the space between them. In a gesture that surprised them both, he raised a hand and gently laid it on her cheek. "I owe you an apology," he continued, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "My reaction was unfair. You were doing the right thing." The touch of his hand was warm, his thumb resting lightly against her skin. It was firm yet impossibly gentle. Camilla held her breath, thrown off balance by the unexpected, staggering intimacy of the gesture. Instinctively, she took a tiny step back. Ethan dropped his hand immediately, his expression shuddering as he misinterpreted her reaction as rejection. "I'm sorry," he murmured, the warmth between them instantly dissipating. "No," Camilla said, finally finding her voice. "It's just, you surprised me." Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, something new bloomed. It wasn't just forgiveness for the night before, but a tacit acknowledgement that the ground beneath them was shifting. The carefully drawn boundaries of their arrangement were beginning to dissolve. "I accept your apology," Camilla added, a small, hesitant smile touching her lips. Ethan nodded, a shadow of a smile returning to his own. "Thank you for looking after Leo last night," he said before leaving the kitchen, "and for respecting our moment." Camilla remained motionless, her fingers unconsciously rising to the spot on her cheek, where his hand had rested just moments before. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, and an unsettling, exhilarating feeling settled deep in her chest. This was not in the contract. None of this was supposed to happen, and yet it was. The text from Mr. Davies, the lawyer, arrived at the worst possible moment. Camilla was in the middle of a losing battle with an electric mixer, attempting to bake a birthday cake for Mrs. Gable, when Ethan strode into the kitchen, his face a mask of tension. "The social worker is coming tomorrow," he announced without preamble. "Davies just confirmed it." Camilla dropped the spatula, splattering chocolate batter across the pristine marble countertop. "Tomorrow? But I thought we had until next week." "It seems Judge Albright wants to expedite the case," Ethan explained, unconsciously loosening his tie. "The Sinclairs have been applying pressure, claiming this entire marriage is a sham to maintain custody." The bitter irony of the situation was lost on neither of them. In a way, Leo's grandparents were right. Their marriage had begun as a complete sham. What none of them, least of all Ethan and Camilla, had anticipated was how the lines between performance and reality had started to blur into an unrecognizable truth. "It's fine," Camilla said, her voice regaining its steady composure as she wiped up the mess. "We'll be ready." The following morning was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Mrs. Gable and the staff polished every surface of the mansion as if preparing for a presidential visit. Camilla meticulously reviewed Leo's room, ensuring it looked impeccable yet warm and lived in. Ethan, meanwhile, was more nervous than Camilla had ever seen him. He paced his study, his hands jammed in his pockets, mentally rehearsing answers to every conceivable question, every possible scenario. "Everything will be fine," Camilla assured him when she found him there. "Leo is happy. That's what matters. That's the truth." Ethan looked at her with a silent gratitude that needed no words. At 11 o'clock on the dot, the doorbell announced the arrival of Ms. Dawson, the feared social worker assigned to their case. She was a woman in her 50s, with thick-rimmed glasses and a worn briefcase that suggested decades of witnessing families at their best and worst. "Good morning," she greeted them, her voice professionally neutral. "I hope I'm not disrupting your normal routine." "Not at all," Ethan replied, shaking her hand. "We appreciate you coming." Camilla stepped forward, offering a smile she prayed didn't look as rehearsed as it felt. "Welcome to our home, Ms. Dawson." The inspection began with the common areas. Ms. Dawson made constant notes in a small, tidy script, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The framed wedding photos, strategically placed though painfully recent. Leo's toys arranged neatly but accessibly in the living room. The children's books mixed in with adult novels on the lower shelves. "Where is the child?" she asked finally. "He's just finishing his piano lesson," Camilla explained. "It should be over in a few minutes. We can show you his room in the meantime, if you'd like." In Leo's room, the social worker paused before a large corkboard wall covered in drawings. They were a riot of color and imagination, proudly displayed. "Leo has been drawing a lot lately," Camilla commented, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "He says he wants to be an artist who paints big, colorful murals all over the city." Ms. Dawson nodded, her gaze lingering on one drawing in particular, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a very large house. "Mommy, I'm done!" Leo's voice echoed from down the hall. A moment later, the boy burst into the room like a small hurricane of energy. He stopped short upon seeing the stranger, his ebullience instantly replaced by shyness. "Hello, Leo," Ms. Dawson said kindly, crouching down to his level. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to meet you and see how you're doing." The boy looked to Camilla, seeking the silent confirmation that this was a safe person. She gave him a reassuring smile and a slight nod. "Do you want to see my pictures?" Leo offered, his confidence returning in a rush. "I have a lot." "I would love that," Ms. Dawson replied, the first glimmer of warmth appearing in her professional demeanor. Leo took her by the hand and led her to the corkboard, pointing out each creation with solemn pride. "This one's my favorite," he said, tapping the drawing of the 3 figures. "It's Daddy, Camilla, and me, my family." The word family hung in the air, imbued with a sudden, profound weight. Camilla felt a lump form in her throat and, without thinking, her hand found Ethan's. Their fingers interlaced, a seamless, natural gesture that wasn't for the benefit of the social worker, but born of a genuine, mutual need for connection in that vulnerable moment. Ethan looked down at their joined hands and then at Camilla, his expression one she had never seen before. His amber eyes, usually so guarded, seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. A shiver traced its way down Camilla's spine. Ms. Dawson, ever observant, watched them for a beat before turning back to the boy. "Leo, do you like living here?" she asked directly. "Yes," the boy answered without a moment's hesitation. "Camilla tells me stories every single night, and Daddy plays with me in the garden on Sundays, and we bake cakes together, and we go to the park, and—" The social worker smiled at his unrestrained enthusiasm. "And do you feel happy?" Leo seemed to consider the question with a seriousness that belied his age. "I was sad before because Mommy went to heaven," he replied at last, his voice clear and honest. "And Daddy was sad too, but now we both smile more." Camilla involuntarily squeezed Ethan's hand, moved to her core by the simple, powerful truth of his words. He squeezed back, his thumb stroking the back of her hand in a slow, comforting rhythm. The visit continued for another hour. They had lunch together. They discussed Leo's daily routine, and Ms. Dawson even witnessed a small impromptu piano recital. "I believe I have what I need," she said finally, closing her briefcase with a decisive snap. "Thank you for your time." At the door, as Ethan escorted her out, the social worker paused. "Mr. Hayes, I've seen a great many families in my career," she commented in a low voice. "Some are built on love, some on obligation. Some work, some don't. Yours, it feels like you're finding your way to something real." When the door closed behind her, Camilla let out a long, shaky breath. "Do you think it went well?" she asked Ethan. "Better than I could have hoped," he replied, still processing Ms. Dawson's final words. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange haze of relief and heightened awareness. The immediate tension of the visit was gone, but something new and charged had taken its place. Neither of them mentioned the moment their hands had joined, but the memory of it pulsed between them, a silent, shared secret. That night, as Camilla tucked Leo in, The boy asked her to sing the soft Spanish lullaby he loved so much. With a gentle voice, she sang the traditional melody, stroking his hair until his breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. When she stepped out of the room, she was startled to find Ethan waiting in the dimly lit hallway. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he apologized. "I just wanted to—" He paused as if unsure of what exactly he wanted. Camilla looked into his eyes, waiting for him to continue. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words and barely acknowledged feelings. "I wanted to thank you," Ethan said finally, "for everything you've done, for Leo, for us." The word us resonated with a new and potent meaning. "You don't have to thank me," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I've gained so much too." They continued to look at each other, caught in a moment that neither knew how to navigate. It wasn't the right time for more words, but they also couldn't simply turn away and ignore the powerful current that was growing between them. Finally, Ethan gave a slight nod and murmured a "good night" before retreating to his room. Camilla remained in the hallway for a moment, her hand resting against the wall as if to steady herself. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Something had irrevocably changed today. What had started as a business arrangement was transforming into something far more profound, something for which neither of them was prepared. For the first time since Marianne's death, Ethan felt as if he wasn't just existing in the house he had bought, but living in a real home. And that feeling, so simple and yet so overwhelming, both terrified and fascinated him in equal measure. The family court division of the Los Angeles Superior Court had the tense, hallowed silence that precedes life-altering decisions. Ethan, impeccable in his navy suit, kept his gaze fixed on Judge Albright as she reviewed the documents one last time. Beside him, Camilla discreetly twisted a handkerchief in her hands. Across the aisle, the Sinclairs, Marianne's parents, watched them with a mixture of resentment and sorrow. When the judge finally looked up, the entire room held its breath. After a careful review of the case file, and in consideration of the favorable report from social worker Sarah Dawson, she began in a measured tone, "This court has decided to maintain full legal and physical custody of the minor, Leo Hayes Sinclair, with his father, Mr. Ethan Hayes." A quiet gasp of relief escaped Camilla's lips. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, the words washing over him. "However," the judge continued, and that single word brought the tension rushing back into the room, "I must note that the minor's emotional stability, while currently satisfactory, remains fragile. Any significant rupture in his current family environment could be grounds to reopen this case." The judge's gaze fell pointedly on Ethan and Camilla as she spoke. "The maternal grandparents will retain regular visitation rights, as stipulated in the agreement submitted by both parties." Outside the courthouse, under the bright midday sun, Ethan finally allowed himself to smile. "We did it," he said in a low voice meant only for her. She nodded, but the judge's warning still echoed in her mind. Any significant rupture. The words carried a special weight for her, knowing the fragile foundation upon which their marriage was built, even as her own feelings had begun to solidify into something real. "We should celebrate," Ethan suggested. "Leo will be thrilled." That evening there was a small celebration at the mansion. Leo didn't fully understand what they were celebrating, but he was delighted to see his father and Camilla so happy and relaxed, sharing a chocolate cake prepared by Mrs. Gable. The next day, however, as Camilla was catching up on emails in the library, a message appeared in her inbox that shattered her newfound sense of peace. "It can't be," she whispered to herself, rereading the email for the third time. It was from Dr. Lucia Morales, her former university mentor, and the director of a prestigious educational institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She was being offered the pedagogical directorship of a new project, an innovative school based on the Montessori principles that Camilla was so passionate about. "I remember how often you spoke of creating just such a space during your student years," the email read. "This is the opportunity you always dreamed of. We need your answer within 2 weeks." Camilla sat frozen, staring at the screen. It was true. For years, her ultimate professional dream had been to lead her own educational project, to implement her ideas about a more humane, nature-connected form of learning. And Santa Fe, with its artistic soul and rich culture, had always seemed like the perfect place. But now there was Leo, and there was Ethan, and this strange, beautiful, accidental family they had built. "Bad news?" The voice of Ethan's personal assistant, who occasionally visited the mansion, startled her. "No, not at all," Camilla replied, quickly closing her laptop. "Just old emails." "I get it," the assistant smiled sympathetically. "By the way, Mr. Hayes asked me to let you know he'll be late tonight. He has an important meeting about a new acquisition." Camilla nodded, thanking her for the information as a storm of conflicting thoughts raged within her. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the offer. At night, after putting Leo to bed, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, weighing her options, imagining two vastly different futures. One afternoon, while Leo was at his swimming lesson, Camilla's best friend Daniela came to visit. "You have to take it, Cam," Daniela insisted after hearing about the proposal. "It's literally everything you've ever wanted." "Things have changed," Camilla replied, stirring her coffee distractedly. "You mean your marriage of convenience?" Daniela was the only person who knew the truth behind her union with Ethan. "It's not just that anymore," Camilla confessed in a low voice. "Leo, he needs me." "And Ethan?" Daniela asked, her eyes sharp and knowing. Camilla fell silent, unable to articulate the complex, burgeoning feelings she had for him. "Oh, honey," Daniela sighed. "You actually fell for him, didn't you?" What neither woman knew was that Ethan, having returned from his meeting earlier than expected, had paused in the adjacent hallway upon hearing their voices. He had unintentionally overheard the last part of their conversation. He didn't stay to hear Camilla's answer. He retreated silently, his face an impenetrable mask, but his mind in turmoil. 3 days later, at breakfast, Ethan seemed unusually cheerful. "I have a surprise," he announced as Leo devoured a stack of pancakes. "I've just acquired the Westwood Preparatory Academy." Camilla nearly choked on her orange juice. You bought a school?" she asked, incredulous. "One of the best private schools in the area," he confirmed, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "It was facing some financial difficulties, and it turned out to be a sound investment opportunity." "I didn't realize you were interested in the education sector," Camilla commented, trying to pass his motives. "It's always good to diversify," Ethan replied casually, though his eyes told a different story. "Besides, I'm looking for a new head of school, someone with an innovative vision who can implement methodologies like Montessori." Camilla's heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be a coincidence. "And have you considered anyone for the position?" she asked, keeping her voice as neutral as she possibly could. "As a matter of fact, I have." Ethan looked at her directly then, his gaze intense and unwavering. "I was thinking of offering the position to you." Leo clapped his hands in excitement. "Camilla is going to be the boss of a school. Can I go there too?" "If your dad agrees," she answered automatically, her mind reeling as she tried to process the whiplash of the last few minutes. Later, after Leo had left for his music lesson, Camilla confronted Ethan in his study. "Why did you really do it?" she asked, forgoing any pretense. "As I said, it's a sound investment," he replied, his gaze fixed on the document spread across his desk. "Ethan, look at me," she insisted. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes revealed everything his words were trying to conceal. "I did it for Leo," he said at last. "He needs stability." The judge was perfectly clear. "Only for Leo," Camilla pressed, taking a determined step towards him, closing the space between them. Ethan rose slowly from his chair, holding her gaze. "Leo needs you here." He paused, the admission hanging in the air. "And so do I." It was the closest thing to a declaration he had ever made. Camilla felt the atmosphere in the room grow thick, charged with unspoken emotion. "You heard my conversation with Daniela, didn't you?" she asked, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. "It wasn't intentional," he admitted, "but yes, I heard about the offer in Santa Fe." Camilla nodded, absorbing the information. "I don't want you to give up on your dreams," Ethan continued, a raw vulnerability in his voice she had never heard before. "I thought maybe you could build them here, with us." Those last two words, "with us," held everything he didn't dare say outright. Camilla felt a knot of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying begin to loosen in her chest. "I need to think about it," she replied honestly. Ethan nodded, respecting her need for space, but as Camilla turned to leave, he added one more thing. "I just want you to know, this stopped being a simple agreement for me a long time ago." Camilla paused at the door, her back still to him, allowing his words to settle into her heart. Without turning around, she answered, her voice soft but certain. "For me too, Ethan. For me too." And as she gently closed the door behind her, she knew the decision was already made, even if she wasn't quite ready to admit it to herself. Her dreams hadn't changed. They had simply expanded to include this complicated man and the wonderful little boy who, without any plan at all, had become the unwavering center of her world. 3 months had passed since Camilla accepted the directorship of the Westwood Preparatory Academy. The school was already beginning to transform under her vision, with new Montessori classrooms being built and programs that integrated diverse cultural traditions into the daily curriculum. Leo, now a student there, was thriving in the new environment. At the Hayes estate, the family dynamic had settled into a comfortable, easy rhythm. The tension of the early days was gone, as was the calculated distance they had once maintained. Yet something unspoken still hovered between Camilla and Ethan, a powerful current of feeling that was acknowledged but never fully addressed. That Sunday morning dawned like any other. The April sun streamed shyly through the windows of the master suite, where Ethan woke before his alarm. Beside him, Camilla was still sound asleep. He watched her in the quiet stillness of the morning. For weeks now, she had agreed to share his room, a concession for appearances they had told each other, in case Leo ever woke in the night and came looking for them. But every morning before she stirred, Ethan found himself returning to the bed just to watch her sleep for a few minutes. He was fascinated by the transformation of her face in repose. Stripped of the quiet determination and strength she wore like armor during the day, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Rebel strands of dark hair framed her face, and her lips were slightly parted. In these stolen moments, Ethan felt a wave of protective tenderness so profound it almost hurt, a feeling he never thought he would experience again. This time, however, something was different. As he watched the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, Ethan understood with absolute soul-shaking clarity that he was done pretending. He didn't want any more arrangements, no more keeping up appearances at night only to retreat to a polite distance during the day. He wanted this woman, this life, every morning, forever. Careful not to wake her, he slipped out of the room. He had an idea. Half an hour later, as Camilla slept on, the bedroom door creaked open. Leo, clad in superhero pajamas, with his hair sticking up in every direction, peeked in with a mischievous grin. Not seeing his father, his grin widened. With the exaggerated stealth of a secret agent, he crept to the side of the bed and, taking a running start, launched himself onto the mattress. "Good morning, Camilla," he yelled, giggling as he bounced. Camilla woke with a jolt, disoriented for a second, before recognizing the small whirlwind now settling beside her. "Leo, sweet boy, what are you doing up so early?" she asked, her arms automatically wrapping around him in a hug. "Daddy told me to come wake you up," the boy confessed, snuggling against her. "He said there's a surprise downstairs." "A surprise?" Camilla frowned, confused. "What kind of surprise?" "I can't tell you." Leo covered his mouth with both hands. "It's a secret!" Camilla smiled, her curiosity piqued. It wasn't like Ethan to plan surprises. "All right, let's go see what this is all about," she said, getting up and pulling a silk robe over her pajamas. "But first we brush our teeth, okay?" Minutes later, with Leo practically dragging her by the hand, Camilla descended the grand staircase. A delicious aroma filled the entire ground floor, freshly brewed coffee, buttery croissants baking, and the savory scent of a gourmet omelette. In the dining room, the table was set with a level of care she had never seen in the house before. A beautiful hand-woven tablecloth with traditional southwestern patterns covered the table. Where had he even found that? Colorful napkins were folded into intricate shapes, and in the center sat a large vase filled with fresh bougainvillea and bright sunflowers from the garden. But there was no sign of Ethan. "Where's your dad?" she asked Leo, who was smiling as if he were privy to the greatest secret in the world. The boy just shrugged theatrically before scrambling into his chair. Camilla approached the table and noticed a small envelope resting next to her plate. Her name was written on it in Ethan's elegant, familiar script. With slightly trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a simple note written with the same expensive fountain pen he used to sign billion-dollar contracts. "You saved not only my son, but me. Thank you for teaching us how to live again." Camilla felt her heart do a somersault in her chest. She reread the words, letting each one sink into her soul. "Did you like the note?" Ethan's voice from behind her made her jump. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway, holding a breakfast tray. He was dressed casually, a rarity for him, in jeans and a simple light blue button-down shirt. But the most striking thing was his expression. The usual mask of guarded control was gone. His eyes were shining with a mixture of nervousness and raw hope. "It's beautiful," she breathed, holding up the note. "All of this is beautiful, Ethan." He set the tray on the table and walked towards her, stopping just a foot away. "Camilla," he began, and his voice held an almost imperceptible tremor. "We started this as an agreement, a contract that was mutually beneficial." She nodded, feeling the air between them crackle with an electric charge. "But I don't want an agreement anymore," he continued, taking one more step, closing the remaining distance. "I'm done pretending." "What do you want then?" Camilla asked in a whisper, though she already knew the answer. "You," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you, Camilla, not as part of a deal, not as a means to an end. I want you because you brought light back into this house, because you make Leo laugh from his belly, because you make me want to be a better man." Camilla felt tears welling in her eyes. For months she had suppressed her own feelings, convincing herself it was all for Leo, denying the truth that had taken root in her heart. "I'll understand if you don't feel the same way," Ethan added quickly, misinterpreting her silence as rejection. "I don't want to pressure you. I just needed you to know." He couldn't finish the sentence. Camilla had closed the final inch between them, placing a hand gently on his cheek. "I want you too, Ethan," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I think I have for a long time, even when I was trying my hardest not to admit it." The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like watching the sun rise. Slowly, as if he still feared she might vanish, he lowered his head to hers. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and tentative at first, then deepened, releasing months of unspoken longing and repressed emotion. A burst of enthusiastic applause separated them. Leo was watching from his chair, his eyes shining with pure joy. "Finally," he exclaimed. "Mrs. Gable owes me $5. She said it would take you guys longer." Camilla and Ethan looked at each other in surprise before breaking into shared, heartfelt laughter. Ethan held out an arm, inviting Leo to join them. The boy launched himself from his chair and into their arms, creating a group hug that sealed what they already knew. They were a real family. As he held the two people he loved most in the world, Ethan thought about the strange, unpredictable nature of life. He had entered into this arrangement to keep from losing his son, convinced that love was a luxury he could no longer afford. And now, on this ordinary Sunday morning, he understood that the real luxury would have been missing out on this, the home they had built together. Not out of obligation, not because of a contract, but because of the bravest decision of all, the choice to love again. Outside, the spring sun bathed Beverly Hills in golden light. In the mansion that was once just a cold, empty house, 3 hearts were beating in unison, rediscovering the true meaning of the word home. The Hayes estate was no longer the solemn, silent place it had once been. Now, on a sun-drenched Sunday afternoon, it overflowed with life and laughter. The garden, once perfectly manicured but devoid of personality, had been transformed into a space full of color and magical nooks where children could explore and dream. "Dad, look how high it went," shouted Leo, now a confident 9-year-old, as he skillfully flew a kite that soared majestically into the bright California sky. Ethan, with a giggling 3-year-old perched on his shoulders, cheered for his son. Lucia, with her cascade of dark curls identical to Camilla's and her father's amber eyes, squealed with delight from her privileged viewpoint. "Higher, Leo, higher," the little girl chirped, clapping her small hands. Not far away, seated on a blanket spread across the lawn, Camilla watched the scene, one hand resting absently on her 6-month baby bump. Beside her, Mrs. Gable was pouring fresh lemonade. "Who would have ever imagined this house would hold so much happiness?" the older woman commented with a nostalgic smile. "Mrs. Marianne would be so pleased to see this." Camilla nodded serenely. Over time, she had learned to live peacefully with the memory of Ethan's first wife. She was no longer a painful ghost, but a cherished part of the family history they shared with Leo. A portrait of Marianne still hung in his room, next to more recent family photos, so he would never forget the mother who had first loved him. "Mrs. Hayes," a new assistant interrupted, "this package just arrived for you. It looks like it's from the academy." Camilla opened it eagerly. Inside were the first printed copies of the pedagogical manual she had developed based on her work at the Westwood Preparatory Academy. The book, titled Education with Roots, blended modern methodologies with the wisdom of diverse cultural traditions and was set to be distributed to schools across the country. "Ethan, they're here!" she called out, her voice filled with excitement. Her husband came over, lifting Lucia from his shoulders and setting her down beside Camilla. He took the book from her, his pride evident. "I knew you would do it," he said, leaning down to kiss her softly. "I'm so proud of you." The transformation in Ethan over the past 5 years was remarkable. The cold, distant man had become a loving, present father and an attentive husband. The worry lines around his eyes had been replaced by laugh lines. While still a brilliant and successful businessman, he had learned to balance his work with what was truly important: his family. The Westwood Preparatory Academy, which he had initially bought as a strategy to keep Camilla close, had become their joint passion project. She provided the educational vision, while he handled the business and expansion. They now had 3 campuses across Southern California, offering quality education to children from all socioeconomic backgrounds, thanks to a robust scholarship program he had funded. "Do you remember when we were pretending to be a happy family for the social worker?" Camilla asked as they watched Leo teach Lucia how to make a paper airplane fly. Ethan smiled, lacing his fingers through hers. It seemed so absurd now, pretending to be something that was already becoming real. Their relationship with the Sinclairs had also evolved. After years of healing and many honest conversations, Leo's maternal grandparents had become a cherished part of their extended family. They visited regularly and adored Lucia as if she were their own grandchild. Just then, the doorbell chimed, announcing the arrival of guests. It was Sunday family dinner, a tradition Camilla had instituted. Soon the garden was filled with the voices of Camilla's parents, who had flown in from New Mexico, Ethan's siblings and their families, and a few close friends who were now considered part of the clan. The long tables set up under the shade of the oak trees were laden with a feast. The grill sent up the savory scent of barbecue. Bowls of fresh salad were passed around, and a large pot of Camilla's mother's famous green chili stew sat next to platters of corn on the cob. The mansion, once a symbol of exclusive isolation, now opened its doors to a warm and diverse community. During the meal, Leo stood up with the solemnity of someone with an important announcement. "I want to show you guys something," he said, running into the house and returning with a large poster board. It was his school project, a family tree. It featured photos of everyone, including Marianne, the Sinclairs, Camilla's parents, and even Mrs. Gable had her own special branch labeled Family of the Heart. "My teacher said I have the most interesting family in the class," he explained with pride. Camilla and Ethan exchanged emotional glances. That tree perfectly represented the home they had built, one defined not by bloodlines or last names, but by love and daily choices. That night, long after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Camilla and Ethan sat on the porch staring at the stars, a ritual they had adopted on their first anniversary. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come back that day," Ethan murmured, referring to the moment Camilla had accepted his marriage proposal. "If you had rejected my offer." Camilla leaned her head on his shoulder, thoughtful. "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually," she replied. "Some loves are just written in the stars." Ethan smiled, thinking how skeptical he would have been of such a statement years ago. Now, with his wife by his side, their children sleeping safely inside and another on the way, he understood the profound truth in her words. The mansion that had once witnessed so much pain now held within its walls stories of healing, forgiveness, and a love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of circumstances, a practical arrangement that fate had transformed into the most authentic commitment of all. And as the night sky spread its starry blanket above them, Ethan and Camilla sealed with a kiss the promise they made to each other every day, to continue choosing one another, not out of obligation or convenience, but for the deep and abiding love that had flourished in the cracks of their once broken hearts.